The Russian forces continue storming the Ukrainian positions within Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad as they manage to continue their advances on the northeastern, southeastern outskirts of Myrnohrad and the eastern parts of Pokrovsk, as Russians are looking to cut off all of the intersections that lead into roads that resupply the Ukrainian forces within Myrnohrad and act as the escape route of the forces withdrawing from the city through these roads. With the capture of Rodinsk, the Russian forces now cover the northern flank of the northern intersection, and with the push through the eastern parts of Pokrovsk, the Russians are looking to gain control over what remains of the apartment complex and industrial area in the eastern parts of the city to cut off the eastern road as well. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are reportedly sending additional reinforcements to the city to try and counterattack and hold the flanks open for the withdrawal of the forces within the cities of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. Therefore, heavy fighting is taking place in the vicinity of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad over the supply lines leading in and out of the cities for the resupply of the forces continuing the fighting within both cities, as well as the forces withdrawing from the cities during the fighting retreat that is taking place as Russians continue their advances within them. The Russian forces managed to gain control over the hill here in the eastern parts of the southern parts of Myrnohrad. With this, the Russians have gained full control over the industrial area and now pushing on the apartment complex buildings in the southern parts of Myrnohrad before moving up to the apartment complex area in the central parts, which separates Myrnohrad into the northern and southern parts. Therefore, fighting continues mainly in the southern parts of Myrnohrad, but there's also been a push by the Russian forces from the industrial area to the east of Myrnohrad and from the northern flank of Myrnohrad into the city, where they've managed to gain a foothold within the residential areas. With this, the Russians are also storming the northern parts of Myrnohrad. In addition to this, the Russians continue offensive operations north of the railway area in the central parts of Pokrovsk, where they've managed to gain control over the eastern parts of the TO504 highway, which connects from the E50 highway onwards to the east through the city itself. With this, the central parts and the eastern parts of Pokrovsk have now become isolated from each other, where the roads connecting them is through the residential areas and not through the highway itself. With this, the Russians are continuing their operations to gain control over the apartment complex and industrial area in the eastern parts of the city. There is much more serious advances and updates to the west of Pokrovsk and in the southwestern direction as well. The Russians managed to gain full control over the industrial area here on the western flank of Pokrovsk, which covers the entire western flank. This prevents the Ukrainian forces from launching any counterattack to cut off the supplies leading into Pokrovsk from the western direction for the Russian forces until they regain control over the industrial area. With the capture of the industrial area, the Russians have now secured the western flank of Pokrovsk and will allow the Russian forces to start threatening the E50 highway before the entry into the city itself, and to push in the direction of Rishene as well. Not to mention, their activity has increased along the border area following the capture of the fortifications here west of Novoserhivka. The Hourglass formation has now been captured, which cuts off the Ukrainian forces operating within Novomykolaiivka, operationally encircling those forces and gaining full control over the border area. With the capture of the border area, the Russian forces have started operations to cross into the Dnipropetrovsk region in the direction of Novopetrovsk, where they are threatening a new offensive in the direction of Meshova, here within the Dnipropetrovsk region. With the capture of the industrial area in the northern flank and the Hourglass formation in the southern flank, the road through the TO406 highway is now open for the Russian forces to operate into the Dnipropetrovsk region, where they'll start fighting over the fortifications along the border area. With this, the Battle of Pokrovsk is already developing to the battle beyond Pokrovsk. As for the southwest of this, in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia region, the Russians continue their offensive operations, where they've managed to gain control over the town of Privilne and the town of Yehorivka, pushing through the western flank of Vishneve. Now, something very interesting was announced by a Russian Telegram group called Voin DV. This group is related to and has direct contacts with the Vostok group of forces of the Russian armed forces. This group of forces is the one that is operating in this section of the front line. Whenever the Russians capture a settlement in this section of the front line and the flags are raised within the towns, this Telegram group is the one that is posting it for everyone to see. All the major Russian Telegram groups use this Telegram channel as their source because all of the posts by this group of forces in the Russian army, sends it to this Telegram group. So they have direct contact with them, and they are reliable when it comes to news regarding this group of forces. Now today, earlier this morning, they announced that the Russian armed forces in this section of the front line has started a new offensive just this morning. This is after the capture of these settlements. So what did they say? They specifically stated, attention, the Vostok group has declared a large-scale offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. This is not a drill. Ukrainian cartographers prepare plenty of red markers. There will be a lot to draw. Editors, cut anti-crisis videos from the archival footage showing the repelled attacks. Edit them so that it is unclear what and where was repelled. Do not ignore the alarm signal. So of course this is a propaganda post by them, but at the same time it is a significant announcement. The first part of it, the announced offensive, could be one of three things. The first point could be a new offensive where they are launching armored assaults to try and breach these defensive lines, gain control over towns such as Yuliapole and Pokrovsk as logistical hubs here to the west of the Donetsk region, and outflank the fortifications and Ukrainian forces within the regions, so a large-scale offensive. The second option could be an intensification of current offensive operations, where they'll be looking to just double or triple the rate of advances, which is currently about 8 to 10 square kilometers a day, up to 20 or 30 square kilometers a day. And the third option could be simply Maskarovka, a operation just to fuck the information field, try to confuse the Ukrainians, try to make it think that the offensive operations are actually bigger than they actually are, to redirect Ukrainian forces from other sectors to this section of the front line so that other sectors can have more success compared to this one, because it is already this section of the front line this month that has advanced the most, where between the first and second lines of defense, the Russians have captured approximately 142 square kilometers this month. In comparison, other sectors are much more spread out. This is much more concentrated. Now, what we do see is the fact that the Russians are in a position where they can outflank the fortifications here in the direction of Yuliapole to gain control over that settlement. They can outflank the fortifications along the first line of defense. To then gain control over it will allow them to use it as a logistical hub for further offensive operations. And with operations in the northern flank of the second line of defense as well, the Russians can isolate the Yuliapole direction from Pokrovsk along the river lines and outflank the fortifications here as well. Gaining control over this area will allow them to launch larger offensive operations towards Pokrovsk and through to the rear of the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk region, bypassing the final defensive lines of the Ukrainians in this section of the front line. This open field area will allow the Russians to make significant advances at a much higher pace. Therefore, it cannot be ruled out that they'll be launching a large-scale offensive to speed up this process and to outflank the fortifications of the Ukrainians. Besides that, we are already seeing the endgame of the Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad fighting, where the Russians are only a few weeks from full capture of both cities, which will allow the Russians to develop significant offensive operations within the Dnipropetrovsk region. If the Russians are redirecting Ukrainian forces from the Pokrovsk section to this area, then the defenses in the Pokrovsk direction will weaken, and the Russians can make more success at a faster pace within the Donetsk region. Therefore, the second option cannot be ruled out either, and the third option is simply the second option, but with a slower rate of advance. So, in either case, this announcement means that things will change here within the western parts of the Donetsk region into the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. As for the second and third part about the editors and anti-crisis videos, it is a reference to sometimes the Russians or the Ukrainians capture a settlement, then the other side posts a video where they are raising the flag in the settlement, where these are typically archived videos where they have already raised the flag before the other side captures the settlement to give the impression that they still control the settlement even though it has been lost. So they're saying, with the new advances coming, to prevent a panic, simply create these videos and prepare them ahead of time, because they are ready to capture them, and ignore these videos. They will have no effect, is what he's implying. He's simply criticizing these sort of videos through this statement. The main point is the offensive that is being announced. If it really is accurate and a offensive is starting, then there will be significant changes in this section of the front line. If it is a diversion, a Maskarovka, then other sectors of the front line can see significant changes. In either case, the Russian fall offensive may be beginning in these coming days. With today's developments, the Russians captured what remains of Previlne here along the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, leaving just Krasnohirsk remaining under Ukrainian control, where the Russians are flanking it from the north, south, and east. The Ukrainian forces will either be withdrawing or be cut off and attacked from 3 different directions with their back to the Dnieper River. In either case, the Russians continue offensive operations along the bank of the river line to gain control over everything to the eastern side, here all the way up to Vishneve, following which the Russians will have full control over the river line from Melinivka in the south, all the way to Privilya and Yerohivka in the north. As for Yerohivka itself, the Russians have gained full control of it, reached through the second line of defense, and outflanking Vishneve from the west. The Russians continue their offensive operations here to flank Vishneve from the northern, eastern, southern, and western directions, where they're looking to cut it off from all supplies. With offensive operations to the north of Verbova in the direction of Novoalexandrivka, they're looking to cut off the northern road which connects to Vishneve, and with the push through the west here near Yehorivka, they're cutting off the western connection as well. This isolates Vishneve completely, along with its fortifications along the second line of defense. So heavy fighting is taking place along the first and second lines of defense, which then opens the road for the Russian forces to reach Danilivka and cut off the highway to the north of Huliapole. The Russians are now just 1 or 2 kilometers from the highway itself, cutting it off and isolating Huliapole from the northern flank, leaving just the western supply line to resupply the forces within the logistical hub that is Huliapole. The rest of the frontline updates will be in the next video later today. That is going to be all for this one, so we don't drag it out too much. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.